The opening scene features a crime boss named Lorenzo Vitali, who heads to his secluded vineyard in Sicily with his grandson. Once there, he asks his grandson to stay in the vehicle while he cautiously ventures inside. To his horror, he discovers that many of his associates have been brutally killed. As he enters the basement, he finds a retired U.S. Navy and DEA agent named Robert Maul, who is being held at gunpoint by two of Lorenzo's bodyguards. Lorenzo asks why he is there, to which Robert responds that Lorenzo possesses something he shouldn't have. After a brief exchange, Robert kills the remaining henchmen along with Lorenzo. The way he does it is also intense. He strikes one man in the face with his weapon. As he exits the basement, he notices Lorenzo's grandson in the vehicle and tells him to stay put. However, as he heads towards his car, the boy shoots Robert in the back and quickly flees. Despite his injury, Robert manages to board a ferry to return to the mainland. Later that night, while driving along the Amalfi Coast, Robert stops and loses consciousness due to the gunshot wound. After a while, a local carabinieri named Gio Benucci finds him in this state and decides to help. He takes him to a remote Italian coastal town in Atrani, where a doctor named Enzo treats him. Upon regaining consciousness, Enzo informs Robert that Gio saved him. He also asks whether Gio saved a good or a bad man, but Robert is unsure how to answer. When he attempts to return home, Enzo intervenes, insisting that his wound needs time to heal and offers him lodging. Enzo takes care of Robert, and after 3 days of treatment, Robert begins to walk with the help of a cane. One day he ventures outside to explore the town, keeping a low profile to avoid the police. He eventually ends up in a local cafe where he meets the owner and waitress named Amina. Shortly after, Gio comes to the cafe during his regular visit with his daughter Gabby and meets Robert. In the next scene, Robert makes an anonymous call to the CIA's Financial Operations Group and speaks to an agent named Emma Collins. He tells her about the basement in Sicily and how it was linked to illegal drug trafficking disguised as a regular business transaction. After passing on this information, he renders the phone dysfunctional. On the other hand, Emma relays the information to other CIA agents. Robert spends the following days wandering around the town and eventually gets to know the locals. Amidst all this, he also discovers the Camorra, an Italian mafia gang that harasses and threatens the townspeople over their income. The gangsters head to a large building where the Camorra's leader, who is also Marco's brother, Vincent Caranta, attempts to forcefully evacuate the premises. It turns out the Camorra is working on a major project, commercializing the town by building new hotels, resorts, and casinos. Meanwhile, Emma and other CIA agents, acting on Robert's tip, arrive at the vineyard to conduct their investigation. There, they discover millions in cash as well as bags filled with illegal drugs hidden in a warehouse. Surprised that these activities were off their radar, Emma and her colleague Frank Conroy decide to delve deeper into the matter. On a routine day, Robert is seen having his coffee at Amina's cafe when he notices Emma secretly trying to take his picture. Robert confronts her, suggesting she take the photo from a better angle. Emma asks why and how he has such precise information about the vineyard's real activities. However, he sticks to giving her a few vague answers, also advising her to dive into the work she has left to do. As she leaves, she calls him by his name, which surprises him. Gio and his family are dining at a restaurant when Marco and his men interrupt their good time. Marco asks Gio to help them set up a boat for private commercial purposes. Robert, who's also in the same restaurant, overhears their conversation and asks them to leave the family alone. In response, Marco threatens him to stay out of matters that don't concern him. In a calm tone, Robert expresses his growing attachment to this town and its people. He then urges Marco to take his business elsewhere and warns him of the consequences if he doesn't comply. When Marco still ignores the warning, Robert twists his shoulder and locks his hand, making him scream. He then orders Marco to leave his weapon on the table and walk out of the restaurant with his men. After a moment, the enraged Marco considers returning with his cronies to kill Robert, but before they can carry out their plan, Robert drives a van, runs over two of Marco's henchmen, and begins fighting them. At one point, Marco holds him at knife point and threatens to kill him. Nevertheless, Robert fights back by twisting Marco's hand and stabbing him in the neck with the knife, ultimately killing him. The next morning, Frank contacts Emma from Rome to inform her about the latest bomb attack at the train station. It was revealed that the money found earlier in the basement was also linked to a similar terrorist act. This makes Emma realize that the Camorra is directly financing terrorism by paying for drug trafficking in Sicily. She begins her investigation by interrogating key members of the Camorra. For this, she also requests a partnership and access with the Naples police chief. Later, the same police chief is seen attending Marco's funeral at Vincent's mansion. During this time, he informs Vincent of the CIA officer Emma's involvement in investigating their illicit dealings. Elsewhere, Emma receives a call informing her of the dire situation the police chief is in. Shortly after, she also receives a call from Robert, who tells her about the Camorra's involvement in the drug cartel closely linked to the previous station attack. Robert's call inadvertently saves Emma's life, preventing her from being a victim of the bomb attack Vincent had planned for her car. In the aftermath, Emma is immediately rushed to the hospital to receive medical assistance. There she meets Frank and alerts him about the Camorra. After learning everything, Frank assures her that he will take care of the rest of the operation. That night, Vincent takes Gio and his family hostage and threatens to shoot them in front of the entire town if his brother's killer doesn't show up. As Vincent receives no information, he shoots Gio in the ear and threatens to finish him off with the next shot. At that moment, Robert reveals himself to Vincent and asks him to let the captives go. He claims that he is ready to be taken and tortured, but not in front of the townspeople. However, Vincent, as arrogant as his brother, refuses, stating that the locals must witness the consequences against the Camorra. But before Vincent can kill him, the townspeople begin recording evidence, forcing the gangsters to retreat. That same night, Robert infiltrates Vincent's house and stealthily kills his bodyguards one by one. Vincent, who is asleep, is startled by a drop of blood on his forehead. The glass just above him suddenly shatters, but he narrowly escapes. He then grabs his gun and tries to contact his already dead gang members. Shortly after, Robert approaches him and forces him to take a lethal dose of his own drugs. Vincent tries to flee from his mansion, but Robert follows him. Eventually, the gangster collapses on the paved road in Naples and finally succumbs to a drug overdose. The next morning, Robert visits Emma at the hospital, who expresses her gratitude for saving her life. He drops a bag full of money on the floor and tells the story of a man named Greg Derer, who lost his pension during an attack. This makes her realize that Robert had followed the trail of the attack to the basement, killed Lorenzo and his cronies, and recovered the exact money that was due to Greg. Curious, she asks if Robert and Greg are friends, to which he clarifies that they met only once, one day at the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. Frank hands Emma a package containing a journal and a note from Robert. To her surprise, it is her mother's journal. Connecting the dots, she learns that Robert is none other than a friend of her CIA parents. In the final scene, the townspeople of Atrani celebrate their victory in a football match. Robert also joins the celebration with a few dance moves, still tough as nails, but blending in with the locals. The story comes to an end.